can a CPU be so underwhelming that even Intel fans pretend it never existed? Let's talk. Intel has been on quite the CPU adventure, churning out some stellar chips for both mainstream users and workstation powerhouses. Over the past few years, some of its consumer-grade CPUs have flexed hard enough to land on best of CPU lists. Yet Intel had also tripped over its own silicon quite a few times, and now they are struggling to keep up with the competition. If we dig through Intel's catalogs, we'll find some absolute stinkers of CPUs that make you wonder how they managed to dodge financial doom for so long. So let's take a trip down memory lane and revisit the company's most spectacular CPU failures that may make even die-hard Intel fans question their life choices. In the early 2000s, CPU competition was basically just a race to see who could slap the biggest gigahertz number on the box. Back then, Intel had a one goal in mind, that is to make fastest processors at all costs, and thus, the Pentium 4 was born. Intel was so obsessed with clock speeds that it practically ignored everything else, including efficiency, power consumption, and even common sense. AMD may have been the first to break the 1 GHz barrier in 2000 with the Athlon 1000, but Intel was already gunning for 2 GHz. By 2001, Intel did just that, and by 2002, the Pentium 4 hit 3 GHz. Intel even dreamt of a 10 GHz CPU within the next few years. Turns out, reality had other ideas. By 2005, Intel realized that power consumption and heat output were skyrocketing. The 4 GHz Pentium 4 was already struggling to exist without melting, and the dream of a 10 GHz chip was shelved. As Intel's frequency race stalled, AMD swooped in with more efficient, high IPC chips. By 2004, AMD had taken the performance crown, and Intel had no choice but to scrap the net burst architecture entirely. While Intel was busy developing high-frequency CPUs, it also had its sights set on revolutionizing server CPUs. The problem is, x86 architecture was stuck in 32-bit architecture, and Intel wanted to go full 64-bit with never-before-seen speeds. Instead of simply upgrading x86, Intel joined forces with HP to create an entirely new architecture called IA64, which would power the Itanium. The plan was to launch it in 1999, and it's meant to change the server world forever. But what followed was a train wreck. Itanium's launch slipped to 2001, development costs spiraled, and when it finally arrived, its performance wasn't exactly groundbreaking. Sure, it could compute in 64-bit, but there was a catch, and a really big one. It couldn't run x86 software. This means it's necessary to rewrite all existing software from scratch. Meanwhile, AMD was cooking up a much simpler solution with AMD 64 that supports 64-bit extension of x86. By 2003, AMD had launched the Opteron, which offered 64-bit computing and backward compatibility with x86 software. Software companies, including Microsoft, quickly rallied behind AMD 64, leaving Intel's Itanium looking like the odd CPU out. Itanium continued to limp along for many more years, and it dragged Oracle and HP into a massive legal battle over software support. Coming out of the flaming wreckage of the Pentium 4 and Itanium, Intel dusted itself off and wanted to reclaim its dominance in the late 2000s. But just ruling the PC and server world wasn't enough. Intel wanted its chips to be everywhere. Inspired by the rise of portable devices like the iPod, the company set its sights on the next frontier, low-power processors for smartphones, tablets, and beyond. Thus, in 2008, Intel introduced Atom, a tiny, efficient CPU designed to infiltrate small, lightweight devices. At first, things looked promising. By 2010, Intel had refined Atom series into the Z600, a chip powerful enough to rival anything ARM had to offer without guzzling more power. Fast forward 5 years and phone still doesn't have an Intel chip. Neither does smart fridge, smartwatch, and other niche devices. So what went wrong? Intel repeated an old mistake, one it should have learned from Itanium. Atom was based on x86, but smartphones were never meant for x86. So mobile software had to be rewritten as well just to run on it, which, unsurprisingly, most developers weren't interested in doing. Meanwhile, ARM-powered chips kept improving, and manufacturers saw no reason to switch. Intel's smartphone dream was over in just 6 years, and Atom's only real claim to fame was powering netbooks. These are underpowered, budget-friendly laptops with questionable functionality. Intel stubbornly clung to its aging 14 nanometers process for years, squeezing out more cores and slight frequency gains with each iteration. However, by the time the 10th generation Intel CPUs arrived, AMD had already moved to TSMC's 7 nanometers process. With 10 nanometers still not viable for its desktop processor, Intel had no choice but to immediately introduce a new architecture. But it came with a couple of severe drawbacks. First, backporting a CPU meant for a denser process on 14 nanometers led to massive core sizes. Secondly, older nodes have higher power consumption, making it difficult to add more cores or push clock speeds higher. The end result was the Core i9 11900K, a so-called flagship of Intel's 11th gen. But it has only 8 cores, down from 10 cores of the previous i9 10900K. And it comes with a bloated 276mm die size as well. Put simply, the 11900K was dead on arrival. At $539, it was overpriced, underwhelming, and lost to the Ryzen 7 5800X, which was $90 cheaper. These may go down as some of the most critically flawed CPUs Intel has ever released. Both generations were intended to push performance further, but instead introduced severe reliability issues. The most damning flaw of Raptor Lake is its voltage instability. Due to a defective microcode algorithm caused these processors to request unnecessarily high voltage levels. This leads to system crashes, blue screens of death, and even irreversible CPU damage. Intel's continued reliance on its aging process node has also led to higher power consumption, and with it, greater heat output. Many users found that their existing coolers were no longer sufficient and more expensive cooling solutions are needed to keep their processors from self-destructing. Many motherboards manufacturers also disabled key thermal and power protections, which allowed these faulty CPUs to operate at unsafe voltage levels. Despite all these setbacks, if history has shown us anything, it's that Intel is nothing if not resilient. With competition fiercer than ever, Intel can't afford another 14th gen debacle. One thing's for sure, there will always be another CPU launch, another bold claim, and perhaps another legendary failure.